The third knight they brought me was already dead inside his armor, and the steward expected me to pretend I couldn't tell. I knelt on the forge hall flagstones with my tool roll spread open in front of me and my hands flat on my knees, because flat on my knees was the only way to keep them from announcing themselves. The tremor in my right hand had been with me for 12 years, a souvenir from a reactor scrub gone bad on a freighter nobody remembers the name of, and it always woke up first when a room was about to go wrong. Some people have a sixth sense. I have a nerve in my forearm that flutters when men in ceremonial cloaks are deciding whether to be furious with me. "Master Armorer Kudelka," said the steward, and his voice did a Valish thing I'd been warned about, where the syllables of my title were extended one beat past comfortable, like a hand on a doorframe deciding whether to push. "You will examine the wounded." 3 suits of ardent plate lay on the trestles. Crimson enamel, fluted shoulders, prayer script chased along every seam. They were beautiful objects, and 2 of them were occupied by men still breathing. The third was occupied by a man who was not. I knew before I looked because of the smell. Valish armor recycled air through a wet filter at the throat gorget, and a live filter and a dead one do not smell alike. The room had a dead one in it. The room also had Steward Varanek in it, and 4 sworn night witnesses and a junior squire holding a tablet to record my work, and on every one of those faces was the careful neutrality of people who had agreed in advance not to notice. I had been on this planet for 16 days. I had been told by my employer and by the trade office and by every Valish official I'd met that under no circumstance was I to suggest that a knight of the Order of the Ardent Hand could die inside his plate. Knights were wounded. Knights were grievously wounded. Knights in the worst extremity withdrew from the field. They did not die in their armor because the armor was holy and the holy did not house corpses. I looked at Varanek. He looked back. He had a long pale face built around a long pale nose, and his eyes were the color of wet slate, and he was younger than I'd assumed when I'd only heard his voice, maybe 40 by his species reckoning. He had the controlled stillness of a man whose hands had been steady for a long time. "The wounded," he said again. "Steward," I kept my voice mild. My hands were going to start in about 20 seconds whether I wanted them to or not, and I needed to be useful before they did. "May I have the order of examination?" "Begin with Sir Halleck," he took the worst of it. Sir Halleck was the dead one. I crawled the 3 meters to his trestle on my knees, which Valish protocol required of any unsworn touching plate, and which was also convenient because my legs were not what I needed right then. I needed my ears. I bent close to the gorget seam and listened. Nothing moved in there. The wet filter was dry. I touched the wrist clasp with the back of my left hand, the steady one, and the gauntlet was room temperature, which on a Valish night meant nothing in him was making heat anymore. The tremor arrived. My right hand began its small private conversation with itself, the index finger and thumb beating out a rhythm nobody had taught them. I let it. I'd stopped fighting the tremor years ago. Fighting it cost more than working around it. I sat back on my heels. "Steward Varanek," I said, "Sir Halleck Vorn is dead. He was breathing wrong for about 6 minutes before the seal blew. The squire who logged his return heard it too. It's on the intake channel telemetry if you want to pull the file. The regulator in his left pauldron seized at altitude and his oxygen mix went lean. He suffocated inside good armor at 100% enamel integrity. That's not a battle wound. That's a maintenance failure, and it's the 3rd one this month if I'm reading the forge log right, which I am." The squire stopped recording. He didn't look up to check whether he should, he just stopped, the way a man stops walking when the floor ends. Varanek did not move for a long time. The 4 night witnesses did not move either, which meant they were taking their cue from him, which meant he had not yet decided what cue to give. When he spoke, his voice was very soft. "You will not say that word in this hall." "Which word, steward?" "You know which." "I do." I kept my hands where he could see them. The right one was dancing now, openly. "I'll say it anyway because the next knight who gets sent out in plate from this forge is going to die the same way, and you and I both know it, and the lie costs more than the truth. Sir Halleck Vorn, he's dead, I'm sorry." A night witness on my left, older, scar across the cheekbone, made a sound I couldn't translate. It might have been a curse, it might have been a prayer, it might have been the noise a man makes when somebody finally hands him a thing he's been carrying alone. Varanek said, "Confine her." 2 of the knights came forward. They were polite about it. One of them even helped me up, which I appreciated because my knees were not going to manage on their own. They walked me toward the small antechamber off the forge hall, and as I went I caught Varanek's eye one more time, and what I saw there was not anger. It was the face of a man who had heard, for the first time in a very long time, a diagnosis offered before the autopsy. They locked me in a room with the suits. I don't think Varanek meant it as a gift. I think he meant it as a containment problem, and the forge was the most defensible room in the keep. But the suits were in there with me, all three of them, and the door had a viewing slit but no audio pickup, and I had hours. I rolled up my sleeves and went to work. Brace rig two-handed, the tremor doesn't care what I think of it, so I've stopped asking. That was the first thing I'd learned to say to myself back when the tremor was new and I was still trying to be the mechanic I'd been before the reactor. The tremor doesn't care, the tremor doesn't negotiate, the tremor isn't punishing me for anything and isn't going to reward me for trying harder. It is weather, you work around weather. So I built rigs, cradles, braces, sleeves that locked my wrist into a known angle, magnifying loops on counterweighted arms, jeweler's vices adapted for armor scale work. By the time the Valish contract came through, my tool roll weighed more than I did and my hands had stopped being the point. The point was the cradle. The cradle held the part. My hands guided the cradle. The tremor became a kind of vibration the cradle absorbed before it reached the workpiece. It also meant I worked slow. Slow had taught me to listen. In the locked forge, with 3 suits of ardent plate and 1 good lamp, I built the listening cradle in 2 hours. It wasn't a new design, I'd used a variant for orbital thruster bearings, where you can't see the failure but you can hear the shimmy if you isolate the housing from ambient noise. I gutted a forge stand for its base, scavenged padding from a discarded saddle, ran a sympathetic cable from a tuning rod a knight armor had left on a bench. I clamped Sir Halleck's left pauldron into it. I put my ear to the cable. The regulator was singing. Not the song it was supposed to sing. A 4-note fluctuation where there should have been a steady hum, with a flat third note that meant the firmware governing the oxygen mix was sampling at the wrong interval. Once every 4 cycles the mix went lean for half a second, and at altitude in exertion with the wearer's metabolism elevated, half a second was a long time. I crawled to the second suit, different night, different campaign, similar wear pattern. I listened, same 4-note song, same flat third. The third suit had a different submodel regulator and didn't sing the song at all. Its wearer was the one with the broken arm who'd survive. I had time to think then, with my ear on the cable and my hands locked into the brace rig because they were tired of working and wanted to dance. I thought about who had access to the regulator firmware. I thought about what it would take to update it forge side without the senior armorers noticing. I thought about Varenek's face when I said the dead man's name, and how he had not been surprised by the name, he had been surprised by my willingness to say it. He'd known. Or he'd guessed and refused to know. There's a difference between those two, and I was going to need to figure out which one he was, because the difference was the difference between an ally and a man who was going to put me on a shuttle home with a polite note. The door opened. Varenek stood there alone, without the witnesses, without the squire. He looked at the cradle, he looked at me, his face had not slept. Sir Yulin Turek has returned from the southern campaign, he said. His plate is seizing around him. We have 4 hours, perhaps 5. The senior armorer cannot diagnose the fault. I am told, and here his voice did a thing, a small bend like a wire being asked to take a curve it was not made for. I am told that you may have heard something I did not. Bring him here, I said. Master Armorer. Bring him here, steward. I have a brace rig already set up and I can't move it without recalibrating, and Sir Yulin has 4 hours. Bring him. They brought him. Sir Yulin was perhaps 30 by his species clock, and he was conscious, which was the bad news because he could feel the plate closing on him rib by rib. The seizure pattern was new to me, but the underlying song wasn't. Same regulator family, same flat third. His firmware had gone further along the failure curve than the others, and the joint actuators were now interpreting the bad oxygen telemetry as a wound trauma signal, and locking down to protect a wearer who didn't need protecting. I cracked the gorget seal with 2 knights bracing the plate open on either side of me. The hiss of bad air came out. Yulin gasped, a real breath, the first in some hours, and started to cry, and a knight on his left put a hand on his forehead and said something in Valish I didn't catch but understood anyway. I worked for 3 hours. I didn't fix the firmware, couldn't in the time I had with the tools I had. What I did was bypass it. I rewired the joint actuators to take their cue from a manual pressure trigger I built out of a glove from my own tool kit, and I locked the regulator into a known good mix from the third suit submodel, and I told Sir Yulin when we lifted him out of the plate that he was going to live and that I was very sorry about his armor. He laughed at me. It was a wet, ragged laugh, but it was a laugh. Varenek watched the whole thing from a stool near the door. He did not speak until Yulin had been carried out. Who, he said. I didn't pretend not to understand. Steward, I don't know who. I know it's someone with night access to the firmware repository and the technical knowledge to alter the sampling interval, which is a small group. I know they did it 3 or 4 updates ago and the failures have been accumulating since. I can show you which build introduced the flaw. Show me. I showed him. I pulled the forge log on the Squire's tablet, ran the version history against the campaign deployment dates, marked the suits affected. The pattern was clean. It was clean enough to read like a confession. Varanek looked at the name on the build author field for a long time. I asked you, he said finally. Who? I did not ask the log. I told you I didn't know. You knew the log would tell me.
Yes.
You wanted me to read it, not you to speak it.
Yes.
He was quiet. The forge banked down around us. The 2 surviving knights snored softly on their pallets. The brace rig hummed, settling. He is my cousin, Varanek said. I'm sorry. You are not sorry, Master Armorer. You are something else. I do not yet know what. I'm sorry he's your cousin, I said. I'm not sorry I found him. Varanek looked at his own hands, which were steady, and at mine, which were not. Why did you build the cradle? He said. Any of my armorers could have built the cradle. Why did none of them? Because their hands work, I said. Mine don't. I had to build the cradle to do the job at all. They didn't, so they didn't. And so you heard what we could not. You could have heard it, you just didn't have to. He nodded slowly. He looked older than he had in the morning. Tomorrow there will be a tribunal, he said. My cousin will be present. He will know what is alleged. He will, by our law, be permitted to demand single combat against his accuser. He met my eyes. I cannot fight him. He cannot fight you. You are not sworn. We have no procedure for what you have done. Then we'll make one, I said. He almost smiled. It was a terrible little smile, the kind a man wears when he has decided not to hide anymore from a thing he has been hiding from for months. Yes, he said, I suppose we will. He wanted me to say it so he wouldn't have to. That was the trap of the tribunal, and I saw it from the moment I walked into the great hall and felt the weight of the room press against my breastbone. Valish ceremony made architecture out of grief. The witnesses were arranged in concentric rings. The accused stood in the center on a black flagstone. Sir Davik Varanek stood there in full ardent plate, helmet under his arm, hair the same pale color as his cousin's, and his face was already set in the calm of a man who had decided how to die. He had decided to die fighting. That was Valish honor. You did not let a stranger accuse you in your own hall. You demanded the duel, and you fell on your own sword if you had to, but you fell as a knight. If I accused him, he would demand the duel against the steward, his nearest sworn kin, and Varanek would have to fight his own cousin or be forsworn. If I let an unsworn knight accuse him on my evidence, it would be a knight Davik had likely trained, and he would kill that knight because Davik was a senior duelist and the younger sworn were not. Either way, more knights died. Either way, the truth came out wrapped in another corpse. The honor code wanted blood and was going to get it unless someone changed the shape of the room. I had the listening cradle on a handcart behind me. I had brought it in myself, refusing the squire's help, because if I let go of the cart handles my hands started up and I needed them quiet for the next 10 minutes. The cart wheels were the loudest thing in the hall as I pushed it to the edge of the inner ring and stopped. Steward Varanek, I said, Knights of the Ardent Hand, I am Master Armorer Kudelka contracted to this forge. I am not sworn. I cannot accuse a knight in this hall and I do not. A murmur ran the rings. Davik's face did a complicated thing. I came here, I said, to demonstrate. I lifted my hands from the cart and clasped them behind my back where the tremor could do its work without distracting anyone. Sir Davik Varanek, with your permission I would like to place a section of your plate into this cradle. The cradle is a listening device. It amplifies the song of the regulator and the actuators. It does not alter the plate. It does not damage it. It only listens. If you grant permission, the hall will hear what your armor sounds like. If you refuse, I will withdraw the cart and leave the hall. It was the cleanest trap I have ever built, and I am not proud of it. If Davik refused, the hall would know he had something to hide. If he agreed, the hall would hear it. He could not refuse in front of his own. He was a knight. He had decided to die well. I grant permission, he said, and his voice was steady and he was beautiful in that moment, the way doomed people are beautiful when they finally stop running. 2 squires unsealed his left pauldron, the one I had asked for because the firmware sat closest to that node, and I clamped it into the cradle myself. My hands were shaking openly now. Nobody in the room pretended not to see. The brace rig hummed up, the amplifier engaged. The song came out. 4 notes flat third. I heard a knight in the second ring make the same small sound the scarred witness had made when I first said Halleck Vorn's name. I heard it travel around the rings like a wave, one knight at a time, each of them hearing in the song the breathing wrong of a friend, a sworn brother, an oath mate, a cousin. Valish ears had been listening to armor for 2,000 years before they stopped. The hearing came back fast. I let it play for a long minute. Then I lowered the amplifier and stepped back from the cradle, and I did not say anything else because saying anything else would have been cruelty, and cruelty was Davik's job now, not mine. Davik looked at the cradle, he looked at the rings, he looked at his cousin Varanek last longest. I have no challenge to offer the master armorer, he said. He was not steady anymore. She has made no accusation. None, Varanek said, she has only demonstrated. Then Davik stopped, his throat worked. Then I will not fight her nor any here, the plate has spoken. He removed his gauntlets and laid them on the black flagstone. I will tell you what I expected and what happened, because they were different. I expected anger. I expected at minimum the long ritual of stripped honors, the cutting of cords, the breaking of seals, the formal expulsion. I had seen the protocols, I had researched them. I had been prepared in the worst case to be killed myself in the chaos of a knight who had nothing left to lose. What happened was Varanek walked down from the steward's chair, past the rings into the center to his cousin. He took the gauntlets from the flagstone and turned them in his hands. He set them on the trestle the squires had brought, and then he sealed Davik's plate back together, slowly, the way you would seal a friend into a coffin you had built with your own hands, the old way, with the kindness of a man closing a door. Go quietly, Davik, he said. Davik went. He walked out of the hall in sealed plate, and I learned later that he walked into the northern reach and was not seen again, which was a Valish way of dying that I will not pretend to understand. I watched. I did not look away. That was the thing I owed him, the thing I owed all of them, that I would not be the human who pulled a hard truth out of a foreign hall and then refused to witness what the truth did when it landed. Varanek came to me afterward. The hall had emptied. The cradle still hummed beside us. Master Armorer, he said, there will be more contracts, there will be, his voice caught, there will be many more contracts, I think, will you stay? I thought about it. The tremor had quieted, the way it did sometimes after a hard day, like a dog that had finally been allowed to lie down. I'll stay through the winter, I said, long enough to teach your armorers to build cradles. I want one in every forge by the time I go. Why? Because the next person who hears the song shouldn't have to be the outsider, steward. It should be you. It should be all of you. The hearing is yours. I just brought a louder ear. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he did a thing Valish stewards apparently almost never did, which was bow. I taught them through the winter. The girl I remember best was named Tessic. She was 15 by her species count, an apprentice 3 months into her training, and she had been assigned to me because the senior armorers were still working out how to feel about a human in their forge, and she had been considered expendable to my project. She was small and dark-haired, and her hands, when she held a tuning rod, were absolutely steady. They did not shake. They had never shaken. They were going to be the hands of a great armorer one day, and she knew it, and I knew it, and so did she. We built a cradle together on a slow afternoon in the 3rd month. She did most of the welding. I held the parts in place with my left hand braced against my right, and I talked her through the geometry, and at the end she sat back on her heels and looked at the thing we had made and said, "Master, why must I learn this? My hands are good." "That's why," I said. She frowned. "I don't understand." I thought about how to say it. The tremor was quiet that afternoon, it usually was when I was teaching, but I held out my right hand anyway and let her watch it for a moment, the small private conversation of finger and thumb. "Tessic," I said, "when your hands are good, you trust them. When you trust them, you stop checking. When you stop checking, you stop listening. The cradle is a way to listen even when your hands are telling you everything is fine. Especially then, do you understand?" "I think so." "Build one anyway. Pretend your hands shake. Pretend you can't trust them. Build the cradle for the day you can't, because that day is coming, and when it comes you won't have time to learn." She looked at her steady young hands, she looked at the cradle, she nodded slowly the way her steward did. "I will pretend," she said. "Good girl, now hand me the tuning rod. We're going to listen to your practice pauldron, and I'm going to tell you everything it says, and then you're going to tell me, and we'll see who hears more." She handed me the rod. My right hand took it and steadied against the cradle's frame, and the tremor and I went to work together, the way we had been going to work together for 12 years, and Tessic leaned in close to listen. The pauldron sang, we listened. After a while she heard the flat third before I did, and she looked up at me with her steady hands and her wide eyes, and I smiled at her because the galaxy had just gotten a little safer for Valish knights, and a girl with good hands had learned to pretend she didn't have them, which is the beginning of every good armorer who ever lived.